Hey, Earthlings. It's that rare creature, the Animal Rights Show.
Endangered species.
Yeah, only comes out of hibernation every now and again nowadays. So this is last week's show, folks. We had all kinds of...
We also have a time machine, which is amazing.
Yes, we did. And we only just got the dates sorted out on our new blurb yesterday too. So welcome along, everyone. And as you can see, we have a special guest panelist, Philip. So welcome along, Philip. Where's Philip from, Wendy?
New York.
New York. Yeah,
New
that's
York.
what you were saying. That's right. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. It's great to be here with you all.
Sorry about that, Philip.
Technically, I'm between New York and Philadelphia in the U.S.
Oh, so you're misrepresenting yourself when you come on and go, hello, Philip from New York. Okay. So Deb says, welcome back. Indeed. We'll see if we can remember how to do it.
Thanks,
a little bit of housekeeping in a sense. If you're not on my YouTube channel, that's the best place to be for the interactive chat. Although if you do comment on Facebook, we will be able to see it, just that you won't be able to see anybody replying to you. So that's the best place to be, but you don't have to be, as it were. And then in terms of just chatting away in general, we don't charge for that. We won't make you charge to have your opinions put up on the screen. Now, in terms of the comments, we're a little bit different this time, because we're going to start off with Philip and a PowerPoint. And so we're going to go all the way through that. But if you think of a question as we're proceeding, do put it into the chat, because we'll be revisiting it and going through them at the end. So as it were, you won't kind of like have your stuff missed out. Speaking of missed out, we're missing a guest.
We've lost a guest. That's a good start, isn't it? You know, when we do the questions after the PowerPoint, Roger, does that mean we have to go back into the time machine again to go back into the time machine?
I thought you were going to ask her
a serious question. Yeah,
Does me think, try and compute this, and I was thinking, it's Wendy. It's Wendy messing about. Okay,
it's just me.
So welcome back, Philip. You you disappeared there, so I'll put you back here, which I think will bring you to the top of the screen when we go for the PowerPoint. So right, so I think we've given enough time for people to start heading in. Hi, Joanna. Right, so do you want to forge ahead, Philip, and then we'll see you at the other end, as it were.
I would like to. I'm having a bit of a technical issue where I'm getting the audio looped and delayed on my end, repeated and looped. So I'm gonna just, with apologies, take a quick minute. I think I'm just gonna go to the audio and visual on my laptop. So I'm just gonna jump off for a second and come right back.
Right on. Yeah, and there's a spelling there. Look.
Exactly right, Deb.
That's right. Indeed. Right. So since we don't do these very often, how the devil are we?
Good. I know. I really miss doing our weekly shows, but even when the month comes round, it's like, wow, is it a month already? It just goes so quickly, doesn't it? But
yeah, it's weird though, isn't it? It's kind of like I find it harder to do a monthly one than a weekly one.
That's true. That's true for me too. It's like we lose momentum or something.
Yeah, it's kind of like we get rid of one of them and we switch off and go, right, we don't have to do that now for ages. And then, like you said, Wendy, it sneaks up on you then, doesn't it? So
just sneak up on you, yeah. I like your choice of language, though. We get rid of one of them. We get rid of one. We get it out of the way.
That's it. Them as well. That's right. Hey, hello. Andy, and hello, Louise.
Louise is here. Great.
Yeah.
Oh, hi, Andy. Nice to see you, Andy. And Louise. Lovely Louise.
Do you know what? I still can't bear to clean Rouge's letter tray.
Oh,
Is that normal?
Yeah.
it is.
Yeah,
It is,
totally
in my
normal.
opinion, it is.
Yeah. Still, I mean, it's not been a week yet, so yeah. So
No.
I'm not rushing anything. That's the main thing.
And I think we should dedicate this show to her, because I remember during all our shows, you could share information about what she was doing, if she was napping or playing or
Yeah.
trying to get your attention. So she was a part of the show, and
Yeah.
I think we should dedicate this show to her.
Yes, thanks.
Yeah, like you wouldn't see her full body, but you just see her little tail coming up by Roger.
That's like a periscope or something like that. Yeah. Yeah, it's really weird because if I throw something on the bed, I have to remind myself that I don't have to worry where that thing lands now. So.
Oh, it's so weird. I know. I've still got boxes upstairs because Misha loved the box. Like you could buy her all the like really expensive cat beds and this and that, and she wouldn't go in them. In fact, I remember once I bought her a massive tower thing, like a really wide, high tower, and she peed in it. And she was like, "Yeah, that's what I think of that." But she loved a cardboard box, as I'm sure many of you who live with cats.
Well, human infants are the same, aren't they? You buy a toy, because there was a big debate about whether you should even bother with a first birthday for a human infant because they don't know what's going on. So really, it's symbolic for the family and not the actual birthday person, as it were.
Yeah, but it's so hard to get rid of those things, isn't it? Because it's got their smell. Like some of the boxes here, they've got Misha's hair and like little bits. You're just, it's just like, yeah, very, very difficult. Very difficult. But yeah. Oh, Fuzzy. Yeah. So it's like they're still with us. You're so right. And they always will be. That's the thing, isn't it?
Hi, Tim.
Hello, Tim.
Okay.
Hi, Tim.
Okay, just to remind everybody. Oh, Philip, you're back. Good. Just to remind everybody then that we will be going through a PowerPoint with Philip first, and then we'll take questions from the chat and from the panel. So, but you don't need to wait until the end. If you kind of think of something and you want to jot it down, it'll be in the chat, and we'll go back to it, so it won't be missed. And of course, we don't have super chats or anything like that to make you pay to have your stuff on the screen. So, right. So, Philip, do you think you're ready to jingo or what?
And I've recalibrated here, but I'm still getting the looping. I'm hearing repeats of everything.
Okay, well, what I'll do is I'll turn down my volume in case it's... But you could always... I mean, if you... I'll tell you what we could try and do is if... is it your own voice you can hear?
The audio repeats and loops.
Okay, so us three, can we mute and then see what that does to Philip's... We'll have to say something now, Philip, so we can do a test.
That's testing 1, 2.
Okay, so you're getting feedback from one of us then, aren't you? That's what it is.
It's delaying. The sound is delayed.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Okay. So, well, it won't. Sometimes StreamYard kind of has to catch up on itself if it's working hard. So it won't be a problem during the PowerPoint because we're going to all mute, and hopefully at the end of the PowerPoint it'll have caught up with itself. Should we try that? Well, there's a long delay, isn't there? Wow.
Can you hear me? Testing. Okay. Let's give it a whirl. Now my audio just loops back on me. What I just said, I'm hearing again.
Well, hang on a minute. Say something again. I'll mute mine. I think it must be me.
Testing 1 2. Test 1 2. I'm hearing things repeated and looped, and I switched to I took off my external gear and set up.
Okay. Have you got another computer monitoring the show with the sound up? Because that would do it.
Oh, hang on. That could be it.
I think it is, because it's at your end, because we were muted and it was still happening. It's like I've got a monitor here, but you've got to have the sound down, otherwise that exactly what you're talking about happens.
That, I believe, was the issue, my friend.
Right.
See what I mean, Doc? Technical wizard.
Oh my goodness, that was. My apologies to everyone. That was exactly the situation. I had another web browser that was playing the broadcast, so I was hearing everything repeated in a delay. So, thank you, Roger. Thank you, everyone, for your patience.
I think Roger should set up his own IT company. I think Roger should set up his own IT company.
Well, Joanna was on there as well. Look, so.
Okay.
Oh, Joanna, well done.
Everybody knew what was going on except for you, Philip, I'm afraid.
Yeah, clearly. Welcome to my world.
Right, well, good sir. I invite you to proceed then.
Okay, super. Okay, well, thank you for welcoming me to the show. I'm a big fan and attend as regularly as I am able. It's midday East Coast time here, and I'm located, I identify as being in New York, and I'm very active in the New York City, animal justice community. I'm actually located between New York City and Philadelphia, and actually doing a bit more now in Philadelphia, given my work with the American Vegan Society, which is based in the Metro Philadelphia area. So yeah, it's great to be here, and I really do appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit of my experience. And I'm thinking about this presentation less as a presentation and more a conversation with my esteemed comrades, the panelists, and also by extension with folks watching and in the chat. And just to let people know a little bit my goal, about who I am, what I'm doing now, and kind of my path to vegan advocacy. And then hopefully people will find that to be of interesting and could be thought-provoking, and we'll have a dialogue about that. So I do have a presentation that I will add to the stage. So the title for this conversation, The Punk and the Vegan Dharma, is informed by a song title from The Who and their Quadrophenia album called The Punk and the Godfather. Big fan of The Who, and was happy to learn from conversation with Wendy. One of the many things we share is a love of The Who. And yeah, so that I hope will be explained in my comments. So just by way of a little bit of background, what I'm doing now, I'm the founding principal of Ahimsa Dharma Anti-Speciesist Action, which is a pan-Dharmic anti-speciesist vegan initiative. Pan-Dharmic referring to the religions and practices that have Dharma and in common, including the practice of Ahimsa or dynamic harmlessness. So that would be Buddhism, Hinduism, Jainism, and I include mindfulness and yoga as well. I just mentioned this past year, I joined the staff of the American Vegan Society, which is the longest running vegan organization in the US, was founded in 1960 by H.J. Dinshaw, and his family continue to be principals at the organization. Jay's wife, Freya, who's been a guest on the show, is the sitting president of the organization. And Freya and Jay's daughter, Anne, is the vice president and managing director of their magazine. I'm a founding member of the Buddhist Action Coalition. So Buddhism is a thread here that I will continue to explore, which is a Buddhist social justice organization based in New York City, founded by Bhikkhu Bodhi, who's a very famous Western Buddhist monastic, recognized as the principal translator of the Pali Canon, which is I guess you could say, the Bible of Theravada Buddhism, and is very active with a global relief organization, anti-exploitation and specifically food justice work overseas. Bhikkhu Bodhi spent more than 20 years in Sri Lanka. And previously, I was a member of the leadership team at Dharma Voices for Animals, which is one of the first Buddhist organizations advocating for animals, based out of San Diego, California. So that's just by way, a little bit of background of my current and historical activities that are relevant to the conversation around vegan activism. So I included this slide from Albert Camus, who's one of my favorite authors. A man's work is nothing but this slow trek to rediscover through the detours of art those 2 or 3 great and simple images in whose presence his heart first opened. That just really resonates with me. There have been moments where, primarily through the arts, and I would include vegan activism as an art form, that really the truth of this quote really resonated and continues to resonate with me. So I love this quote from Kurt Vonnegut, who's a great American author and also a great favorite. If I should ever die, God forbid, let this be my epitaph. The only proof he needed for the existence of God was music. So really meaningful. Music from a very young age has played a big role in my life. Worked in the field professionally for a number of years. And so just wanted to kind of use this quote as a framing device for my comments. This is a quote from Jimi Hendrix's grandmother. I've seen Slavery and I've seen Jimi Hendrix perform. That about covers it. And this really kind of is I would say, I'll characterize as a springboard to my comments, my kind of sharing a little bit of my personal history. When I was a small boy, and this is going back to the late 1960s in Boston, Massachusetts is where I'm from. And I grew up in primarily in my mom's Italian-American home family. And I had an uncle who was my mother's younger sibling, and he was only 10 years older than I am. And is more like an older brother than an uncle. Sadly, he's passed on, but I spent a lot of time with him, and he later lived with us, and he exposed me to some of the music of that time. And this is, the late 60s, and I was just a young kid at the time, but that the Camus quote definitely resonates when I think about the first time that I heard Jimi Hendrix's music, because at first it was almost frightening. It was just so otherworldly and really disconcerting. But I came to really love, and still to this day love the music as just being an expression of freedom. It was just so in a way that I can't even find words, just that freedom of expression that really was a first kind of sign that there's another way to experience the world than I had known, kind of a glimpse into a world beyond the mundane day-to-day existence. Really powerful to this day. So this slide is kind of an amalgam of images. And my thought here is that there was a period of time after this Renaissance, you could say, characterized in the US by the Summer of Love. And there was a lot of optimism for a different way of being in the world for people generally. And it kind of gave way to a lot of really challenging events, a lot of discontent, a lot of kind of, what's the word? Dissatisfaction. And these are the things that really formed me as a very young person. And I'm going back to, starting grade school and into grade school and junior high school in the US. So the assassination of Martin Luther King and Robert F. Kennedy, who are the images on the left, the top image is from the Democratic Convention in Chicago, where there was a riot, and the protesters there were protesting the Vietnam War. There was a violent crackdown on the activity. Richard Nixon perpetuating the war in Vietnam and orchestrating a break-in, that became famous as the Watergate break-in, trying to smear his enemies by breaking into the office of their psychiatrist in the Watergate complex, and the Democratic national headquarters as well. The bottom image is iconic in a very negative way of the evacuation of the final Americans in Vietnam. One of the things that actually doesn't get talked about as much as some of these more high profile that had a profound impact on daily life was the OPEC cartel's embargo of gasoline. Gasoline was not available. The price jumped, and it really just showed this kind of glowing American century, and this optimism was really tarnished, and there's a sense of profound dissatisfaction. The image in the right corner was an heiress by the name of Patricia Hearst, who was an heiress to the Hearst media empire, and she was kidnapped by this radical revolutionary group and became a member of the group. And this was just, a lot of just dissatisfaction and that's the word that's just come to my mind. People, and it led to this malaise that really kind of colored the image and the consciousness of the country. And that's how I, grew up as a young person. The top right corner is kind of the music kind of reflected this kind of bloated, had lost the ideals of the 60s and was really just kind of this bloated and fatuous arena rock. And that's an image of the Alice Cooper and his band. And I just thought that was kind of iconic, real theatrical, kind of pompous approach to this music that had a really revolutionary force previously, and thinking about the Jimi Hendrixes of the world. Next slide. So the experience I had of that, you know, going back to that Camus quote where the world changed. And I think about when I was a kid, my mom would say that when Elvis Presley came into our lives, the world went from black and white to color, right? And my experience of hearing for the first time the Sex Pistols, God Save the Queen, I was in a convertible driving with the top down, driving to the beach, Cape Cod, and the wind was blowing, and I heard this music, and it was as if the world went from black and white to color. It was just such a profound opening that there was another way, you know, kind of a tear in this fabric of malaise that had kind of descended on the country, is certainly how I and my peers experienced it. And I really kind of, this became an all-consuming nexus of activity and focus in my life at this point. And I was, you know, in my mid-teens at this point, and the music, the punk and post-punk music that kind of erupted from this, you know, opening became kind of an organizing principle in my life. I went off to university, and I was among the first generation in my family to attend university. I come from a working class background, but I did grow up in a pretty privileged suburban environment. When we moved from the city to the suburb when I was 8 years old, and went to university, and graduated and promptly returned to Boston. I studied at a university in Baltimore, Maryland, and jumped back into the music scene. And I had the good fortune to be introduced to the founder of a kind of iconic and pioneering record label, in that it's called Ace of Hearts Records. And the logo in the top center is the Ace of Hearts logo. The scene in Boston was really among the leading scenes for this post-punk music scene in the US. And these images are of some of the bands that we, you know, marketed, recorded their albums and marketed them. And particularly in the lower left corner, you see the image of the guitar player with the orange t-shirt. The band is Mission of Burma, and they have become, they went on to become, they had a short, kind of an interesting sidebar story. They had a very short first life. The band only performed for about 4 years. And Roger Miller, who's the gentleman in the guitarist with the orange t-shirt, suffered from tinnitus. The band broke up, and they subsequently became very, very influential on many bands who came later, who really became icons, and bands like Sonic Youth and REM, Moby, all huge fans of Mission of Burma. And people clamored for them to reunite, and they declined for 19 years, and then organically decided that by performing, you know, at a show opening for a famous British band actually called Wire. And they went on to reform and had a second life 19 years later, which is unheard of. But I spent many years immersed in this culture, and it was really a profound experience, really, you know, being part of a kind of a revolutionary movement. I don't think it's an exaggeration to say that, bringing this music that really challenged all the orthodoxies and really changed the course of history, certainly musical history in the US and beyond. And these bands, particularly Mission of Burma, had a global impact. And it was a really enlivening and invigorating experience for me. This is an image of the band Nirvana, and I include them because we got to know them very early on before their fame. One of a person who was a prominent member of the Boston music scene, was a representative for their first independent label, Sub Pop. So, and she booked bands and she brought them to town. Later, a guy who worked with us at the Ace of Hearts label went to work at the majors and was part of a group that signed Nirvana to Geffen Records, so a major label deal, and released, you know, the Nevermind album that really changed the world. And there's actually an amazing long article, and if anyone's interested, I could, you know, share it with folks if they want to DM me on social media. The band played a show in Boston the night before Nevermind was released, and literally the next day they became overnight like global icons with the release of Nevermind. A really fascinating article. But so it was really incredible to have the experience of knowing these guys when they were, you know, unknowns, getting to know them a bit, and particularly getting to know Kurt, who was a really interesting guy and brilliant, I mean, genius, and seeing the enthusiasm and the commitment to the music and really changing the world. And then, you know, as is often the case, or frequently can be the case, fame proved that it was very difficult. I think about Kurt, particularly his health declined, and in no small part due to self-medicating with, you know, hard drugs, including heroin. And, you know, I had an experience that I can remember where I was and what was going on when the news reached us that, you know, that Kurt had died by his own hand. And it really shook me. You know, in fact, I was at a show headlining by one of the Ace of Hearts acts, and you know, the rock and roll lifestyle was in full effect and had been in for many years, and that included, you know, a lot of drinking and drugs, and a lot of just kind of a crazy lifestyle. And I was at this show when we received word of Kurt's death, and the front man for the band made a joke about it. And in that moment, I realized, you know, this is not sustainable way to live for me. You know, like my own, you know, drug and alcohol consumption had really started to escalate living in this world. And it just hit me like a ton of bricks when he made a joke about Kurt Cobain's suicide, that, you know, it's time for me to take a look at the way I'm living my life, and how I'm living, and what I'm doing, you know, to try and contribute to making a better world. You know, and this is a quote. I happen to live very close by to Princeton, New Jersey, and F. Scott Fitzgerald is a well-known author and Princeton alumnus. And, you know, this quote really described how my life had become at that point, which was a dark night of the soul. You know, alcohol and drugs had really kind of taken over my life and had me by the throat. And Kurt Cobain's death really kind of was a wake-up call that it was time to do something about it. Very fortunately, I had people come into my life who guided me on the path of recovery. And one of the most important people on that path was a friend who had been a Buddhist practitioner, had moved to the Boston area from Los Angeles to pursue a dream in recovery of attending the Berklee School of Music, which is a very famous music school in Boston, world renowned. And he brought me to the Cambridge Insight Meditation Center, where I began a practice. I took refuge in the triple gem. Buddha, Dharma, Sangha is the term used, making a formal commitment to Buddhist practice as part of my recovery, which is a practice I made to this day. And the contemplative community is one of my core communities of affiliation, again, to this day. But it really played a profound role in adopting a new way of living, a new way of being in the world. So I include this slide. One of the things that really is meaningful, a core aspect of Buddhist psychology, is the idea of two truths. The two truths being conceptual, which is the truth of differentiation and separation that's necessary to live as an embodied being in the world. And it is a form of truth, but it contrasts to the second truth or form of truth, which is ultimate truth, which is accessible through meditative insight by deep practice, which is to see that, in fact, the relative truth that is necessary to navigate in the world is at the same time an illusion relative to ultimate truth, meaning all things and all living beings are connected. There is a unitary principle that is the ultimate truth of existence. And that's played an important role in kind of developing a sense of compassion for all sentient beings. And I'll talk a little bit more about that relative to one of my early teachers. So the teacher here pictured is my first Buddhist teacher, Larry Rosenberg. He's the founding teacher of the Cambridge Insight Meditation Center. And he really had a profound impact on my life, and about practice as being very simple and being present to one's lived experience. And he's famous for writing and speaking about breath meditation as being an anchor in reality, as a means to move beyond conceptual reality, to really experience, not just understand intellectually, but experience that unitive truth of ultimate reality. And, at about that same time, it's really kind of a convergent. And before we came live, there was a comment made about coincidence, and Wendy called into question, is there any such thing as a coincidence? And in recovery communities, there's a phrase that's saying, using God language, coincidence is God's way of staying anonymous, right? So it's why I mention this in this context here is that at the same time I was brought to Buddhist practice, I had an experience. I was walking by the Boston Common, which is the green space akin to New York Central Park in Boston. And there were people that had set up kind of folding card tables on the edge of the Boston Common. And what caught my attention was the brightly colored flyers that they had on this table. And I went and took a look at this table, and the folks were from the Boston Vegan Society, and this was their first ever Boston Veg Food Fest, which has since grown into a massive, it encompasses an indoor arena in Boston, but this was actually the very first Boston Veg Fest. These folks just setting up card tables, and it was with flyers, right? And it was my first exposure to the realities of so-called animal agriculture, and I remember just being like, the light came on in a way that was deeply disturbing, but also liberating, that, knowing the truth of the food and clothing and the consumer goods derived from animals that I hadn't given anything resembling a thought to. It just did not come on my screen. And these events, coming to the Dharma, and being awakened to the truth of animal exploitation, and to use the term that Roger uses frequently, cultural speciesism, and seeing through that veil was just such a profound experience that it informs the way that I show up in the world to this day. Larry mentioned later that he had been involved with this organization when he was one of the first teachers that joined this first Buddhist vegan organization called Dharma Voices for Animals. So I reached out to them and was very involved with that organization for many years as well. So as folks may or may not know, while in theory, Buddhists and Jains, especially Jains, but all of these folks who practice in these pan-Dharma communities, given the teachings, it would be assumed that they would be vegan communities. And sadly, and this is true for Jains as well, there's a misconception that Jain communities are largely vegan, and they are not. And I was just really, particularly given that my first teacher was vegan, I was just shocked when I learned that these communities that practice ahimsa as kind of a core organizing principle and recognize explicitly, unlike the Abrahamic religions into which I was born, into the Roman Catholic faith. Unlike these Abrahamic faiths, the pan-Dharmic religions explicitly include all sentient beings in the moral community, and yet they were not vegan. And like so many other communities that rely on the logical fallacies, and I think about Benny Malone's great book illuminating these and organizing and illuminating these fallacies, and that has played a really important role in my vegan advocacy. Things like appeal to tradition, appeal to culture, appeal to futility. These same fallacies and were used in these communities, and specifically the Buddhist community in which I operated. And I point to the next two slides. This and the next slide are really showing that the foundational teachings of Buddhism are unequivocal in their condemnation of the harming or killing of sentient beings. So the Dhammapada is an aggregation of verses. It's widely recognized as the first and the actual teachings of the historical Buddha, encompassed in this short book, aggregated as a book with these verses. And these are verse 129 and 130. And I'll mention the translator here is a friend of mine, Glenn Wallace, who I'm grateful to have been able to support on his path to veganism. And he's now a vegan, a steadfast vegan activist and advocate in Buddhist communities and more generally as well. And kind of the other component part of Buddhist doctrine that I point to in my vegan advocacy in Buddhist communities, the Eightfold Path is the kind of the map for living the Buddhist, Dharma, right? The third of the Eightfold Path is right action, and within that path factor is what's known as the first three of the 5 lay precepts. And not surprisingly, given the impact it has on sentient life, the first precept is very clearly articulated as refraining from harming or killing sentient life. And I mentioned Bhikkhu Bodhi earlier through his being one of the co-founders of the Buddhist Action Coalition, where I'm engaged as the translator. This is from a commentary deriving from his translation of the Eightfold Path. So one of the key and core arenas in which I'm active as a vegan activist is in these pan-Dharmic communities, and especially Buddhism. I referred to at the outset the founder of Ahimsa Dharma Anti-Speciesist Action, where I've been able to make some headway in advocating and convincing, getting commitments from Buddhist communities to adopt plant-based food policies. There's a lot of work still to do, but that's one of my core areas of activism. The Buddhist Action Coalition, successful. I'm happy to report in advocating despite resistance, which I say that because it's just astonishing that in Buddhist communities there was resistance to the adoption of a plant-based food policy, but I was successful in doing so and continue to advocate within these communities for initially and foundationally, a plant-based food policy as a way of, advancing veganism beyond food choices as well. So the monk on the left is, folks might recognize him. He's one of the most famous monks. He passed away recently at an advanced age. Thich Nhat Hanh, he's a Vietnamese Buddhist monk, was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize by Martin Luther King. And in 2012, he delivered a missive to his community that's become famous, known as the Blue Cliff Letter, where from that moment forward, all of his centers were to be served plant-based food exclusively. And a number of people, a number of organizations have in his honor named the organization for him. The Thich Nhat Hanh program for Engaged Buddhism is at Union Theological Seminary, which is one of the most famous theological seminaries in the U.S. The program below is a relatively newly launched initiative for mindfulness in public health at the Harvard Public Health School, which is one of the leading schools of public health in the world. And as they have named their centers in honor of Thich Nhat Hanh, I was successful in advocating for them to adapt plant-based food policies at their centers. So again, this is just kind of to recap my engagement through ADASA, which is in the Buddhist communities, very active with the American Vegan Society, and my area of profession. And this is a larger conversation, perhaps for a return visit. I do work as a professional fundraiser, and my career in sobriety has been working in that field. I know it's controversial in the movement where there's criticism of organizations having to water down their message in order to placate funders. I work very actively to ensure that that is not the case. It's a very complex dynamic, to say the least. But I think it's important that organizations, with all due respect to the grassroots, and I consider myself a grassroots activist as well, certainly, but to empower organizations that can have impact by being resourced and maintain an unequivocal commitment to animal liberation is really, I view it as an art form, and it is really one of my key practices as a animal justice activist. And I'm deeply honored to share with you all that the image above is of a Courage of Conscience Award that was bestowed on me for my activism by the Peace Abbey Foundation in 2022, which, is just, it's a hard road that we walk, a lot of challenges and a lot of negative feedback and a lot of just difficulty. And I have this award on my mantle, and I look to it as one of the inspirations to continue to work for animal liberation despite the challenges. This is one of my other main inspirations. These are 5 of the beautiful sentient beings with which we share our home, my wife and I. We've been active in the greyhound rescue community for many years, and these beautiful beings who are individuals with unique personalities and who, feel joy and pain and suffer in just the way that I do. And they're a daily reminder of the commitment to, and the moral imperative to advocate for liberation for all sentient beings. So just as a way to kind of encapsulate, this is my beautiful boy, Marcus, who sadly passed several years ago. But just, I chose these images as a way to just kind of sum up my commitments in these communities, the animal justice and Buddhist communities, and at their intersection as kind of where I operate in the world. And I can't put into words how grateful I am that I was awakened to the reality of cultural speciesism, and my appreciation for the support from the panelists. I consider myself a member of this community, and these folks are my friends and comrades in the struggle. And I just draw so much strength and affirmation from those relationships, and by extension to the entire animal liberation and animal justice communities. I couldn't do it alone, and I just want to, wrap up by sharing my appreciation to everyone, for everyone who supports me in my work. So, may all sentient beings be well, happy, skillful, and peaceful. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Philip. We've got a couple of things to start with in the chat. A couple of ones from Deb. I've gone past it.
It was 6:17. The first question.
Question for later for Philip. Do you follow any specific school of Buddhism? I don't. Did you specify that?
I did mention I would align with Theravada Buddhism, which is one of the 3 main schools, along with Tibetan and Zen, who are together are grouped as referred to as Mahayana Buddhism. So that's primarily, and within that, the insight meditation tradition is kind of a subcategory, if you will, of Theravada Buddhism. Yeah.
You get a situation where there are quite a lot of branches, as it were, then?
Yeah, I mean, there are, but those are the three main schools. There are branches of those traditions, but those are the three main. And I'd say Zen is probably in the U.S. the most, Zen and Theravada through the insight community are the most, popular and well known.
Yeah. Okay. And Deb also said in the past slide, it discussed the sentience of living beings being different from the sensitivity of some stimuli that plants have. And of course, this is still in terms of outreach. We still get a lot of pushback. A lot of people don't realize that the fact that plants are alive, it isn't the full story for us. Mm-hmm. So is that kind of incorporated into the teachings? Because I always thought that Ahimsa was probably more pushing to reverence for life, all life, beyond sentience.
No, there is. It is very moral recognition inclusion in the moral community is very specifically sentient life. And if on the Bhikkhu Bodhi slide, it talks about that a bit, but I don't see the plants have feelings too, though, argument any more than I would see it in the general population. And I mean, on that point, it's just, I mean, there's no obviously stating what's obviously true to so many here that it's, there's no scientific proof of plants being sentient in the, demonstrating unified self-awareness. And moreover, if people are suddenly presenting as plant right activists, the fact that so-called animal agriculture results in so much more plants being grown and used to feed livestock, so-called livestock that are then, it's cycled through animals that are then consumed, that it's really an argument that's ridiculous on its face.
Mm-hmm. Linda says, thank you very much. And so did Deb. And finally, in terms of the chat here, Tim can't resist going back to the music. Do you still listen to up and coming bands? Yeah,
thanks, Tim, for weighing in. In fact, I do. And one of the, I go see some of the older bands too, certainly, but one of the bands that really had an impact on me, and I saw them in New York City, they happen to be from the UK. They're called Idols, IDLES. Really impressive. So yes, I do. I'm not as plugged in, and it's a little more difficult to keep up on the newer bands now than when I was really immersed in that world. But yes, the short answer is yes. And Idols from the UK is a fairly recent, history memorable example of that. Yeah.
Okay. Linda says this, Mayana, is it? Buddhism, the object of coming back to the idea of expansive inclusion rather than personal enlightenment. There is an emphasis on helping others.
Yes, I think Linda's pointing to what's called the Bodhisattva ideal, which is in Mahayana Buddhism, when beings become enlightened, they don't go off into ultimate bliss themselves. They have made a commitment to not to continue to take birth in the cycle, participate in the cycle of birth and death, which is known as samsara, the material world, until all sentient beings are liberated. So that's the Mahayana. In Mahayana, it is most prominent, the Bodhisattva ideal. That's right. Yeah.
Right. Okay. And we've also got Dharma means.
So I guess the simplest way, Dharma is like the path of righteousness. It's like the way of being in the world that is essentially reflects an awareness of this unity of presence, that the ultimate reality, right? In that I referred to earlier, having that awareness, one shows up in the world with compassion, but refraining from harming, refraining from behaving in a self-centered way, and looking to be of service, recognizing the unity of all sentient life, and by extension, all life. It's the kind of a path of righteousness.
Oh, sorry, Nelly, you're going to go as well. Me and Nella are both, obviously.
Oh, go ahead, Wendy. Go ahead.
No. Yeah, I don't mind if you want to go first.
Okay. I have to admit I don't know much about Buddhism, so thank you for the interesting presentation. I'm always a little worried when veganism is connected to religions for two reasons. One is that I'm afraid every religion works as something that separates us from others, and it creates in-group and out-group mentalities. So I'm wondering, what do you think about that in relation to Buddhism? And the other one is I'm trying to look, where do religions in general stand on species and other kinds of oppression, and specifically oppression of women. So I was trying to find some info about Buddhism and that, and I wanted to ask you, what is the position of Buddhism on women? Because from what I read, and may not be accurate, because as I said, I haven't done thorough research or anything, read that in some branches of Buddhism, women are seen as more connected to the physical world because of giving birth, for example, or that we are seen as more sensual, or that it was thought that women cannot reach the same kind of enlightenment as men, or that Buddhist nuns, no matter what their rank is, they are always inferior to a male monk, and things like that. So I would love to hear from you about this, about gender roles in Buddhism.
Thanks, Nella. I'll tackle the second piece first. I had an experience. I'll just use an experience I had to kind of illuminate what you're talking about. I went overseas to practice a long meditation retreat in Burma, and in the Theravada tradition, which is not is different from some of the other Mahayana traditions. An individual can, what they call, become a monastic, take robes temporarily. It's accepted, so people will go on retreat and they'll live as a monastic temporarily, and that's understood from the beginning that it would be temporary. And at this retreat center in Burma, where I went to practice, I was with a group, and one of our group, who happened to be a man, decided to temporarily take robes, shaved his head, took, wore robes, and practiced in the community as a monastic. And among the leaders of this community, there's a guiding teacher who was a man. The senior administrative leaders of the center happened to be two women, one of whom was a monastic and one a former monastic. And my friend who temporarily took robes, despite that fact, was immediately senior to the women who ran the center. And I thought that was abominable. I've not been back to Asia to practice since, because these are very traditional cultures, and this is in no way an apologist, being an apologist of this. They're hierarchical and patriarchal societies, and we still, that's not I'm consider myself a pro-feminist, and as part of collective liberation, we need to smash the patriarchy and knock down all hierarchies, and that's obviously central. But yes, it is a serious problem in Buddhism, and in fact, one of my closest fellow advocates in the Buddhist community for veganism is a person, happens to be a woman, Western convert Buddhist, but was a monk, a woman by the name of Thanissara, who I was happy to be able to support her and her now husband, who is also a former monk, former monastic as a monk. And Thanissara has been a leading voice for, undermining the patriarchy and these traditional hierarchies. In fact, she was a monastic at a Theravada Buddhist center located in the UK, and ultimately was forced out, or you quit, depending on who you ask, by her unwavering challenge to the patriarchal hierarchy of these, despite it being in the West, in the UK, this traditional Buddhist, monastery maintained this rigid hierarchy. And ultimately, Thanissara and later her husband, who was a monk at the time at this same monastery, left and continue to fight against this hierarchy. So the short answer is yes, it's a problem. And as part of a broader social justice commitment, there are groups fighting it. And I include myself in that cohort. With regard to veganism and religion as, establishing in and out group, I think that is a challenge. One of the things about, there are a couple of things about Buddhism that have always appealed to me, is that it has a very robust and long-standing history of adapting to the cultures into which it moved, unlike to a much greater degree than other faith traditions. Going into places like China, Tibet, and incorporating the indigenous religions to modify Buddhism. Tibet being a great example, with the kind of the greater emphasis on ritual and ceremony that's derived from the indigenous Bon religion has really shaped Tibetan Buddhism, and just a general from that or within that an ability to be more flexible and more adaptive to native cultures, and to very explicitly, as I mentioned earlier, recognize all sentient beings as members of the moral community. So yes, I think there's that danger of in-group and out-group, but I think it's more readily surpassed, if you will, than in other religions. And that's part of the work, and as a means to kind of summarize with this, the people are probably aware the secular mindfulness movement derives, it's a practice that's been kind of uplifted from the Buddhist religion, and I think, and I have a credential in mindfulness facilitation, and I bring it into my work, including in vegan activism, as a tool to get that, to achieve that insight into the unit, a fundamental unitive consciousness that underlies, the differentiation that we experience, and to a certain degree have to just be in the world. So I like to think that that's a way of kind of breaking down the barriers by bringing this mindfulness practice as a way of broadening the appeal of veganism, because when you realize that we're all connected and all part of a single, unitive consciousness, that if I'm harming others, I'm harming myself, right? So I guess that's the way I try and address that in-group, out-group, dynamic you mentioned. I hope that's helpful.
Thank you.
Thanks, Philip. I've got loads of questions that have popped into my head from what you just said, but I really want to ask this question that I already had, because I think this is really important as well, and it kind of ties into some of the stuff you were just saying, but I just wonder generally what the Buddhist philosophy or religion, however we want to think of it, what the perspective is on other animals. Because interesting, you said that, and quite surprisingly, sometimes many Buddhists are not living vegan, and it's not prevalent in the communities. And I just wonder what the perspective is of other animals. And from what I understand, and as Nella said, I too don't know like a massive amount about Buddhism. I'm only just kind of learning from reading and hearing you. But I understand that other animals are seen as occupying a different realm to humankind and to demigods and all these. I think other animals are put into what was the category? Animals, ghosts, and hell, or like the unhappy rebirths. Obviously I'm please excuse my ignorance and all of this, but if they are inhabiting this different world or this different realm, it's almost again perpetuating that human animal dichotomy that we have, and as anti-speciesists and total liberationists, we want to break down that dichotomy, and of course the hierarchies and that kind of thing. But is that as a fundamental part of the philosophy then perpetuating speciesism, perpetuating that dichotomy, and making it harder to see that in fact we are all connected and we are all, we're all deserving of our moral inherent rights as living beings on the earth? Mm-hmm. Does it perpetuate that separation? And do you see that as part of the work as well as changing maybe that perspective?
Mm-hmm. It's a great question. And to your point, yes, there are realms of existence in the Buddhist cosmology. Animals occupy a rung below human beings. However, in the core teachings, which is why I come back to these core teachings, they are members of the moral community, to use kind of more of a Western framing. They are entitled to what we would call, bodily autonomy, respect for their being, sentient beings, and the subject of a life. So the challenge about about Buddhists not living vegan is less about that hierarchy, in my estimation, and more about the layering on of over centuries and millennia suttas, or teachings that are informed by local customs, including, this dates back to the Iron Age, where there was not the awareness in general of animals as being sentient beings. There were survival imperatives that could have and did implore human beings to subjugate other animals for their use, right? For the use of human beings. So these later teachings, suttas, are layered upon the core teachings, and folks who are in their own lived experience, wherever they may be, and are under the sway of cultural speciesism, will point to these layered upon teachings and as a justification. One of the most common being a famous sutta called the Jivaka Sutta, where it said that wandering monastics, so the monastics eat one meal a day before noon, and they can't store, gather or store food. They live on alms or with a begging bowl, right? So there was a question of can these, monks consume animal products despite having taken the vows, of the monastic vows. And the sutta, which was laid on later, said if the monk does not see, hear, or suspect that the animal whose flesh they would put in their begging bowl was not, if it was not killed for them, that it would be acceptable, which many people, myself included, challenge on its face. But assuming that were to be the true teachings of the Buddha, it applies only to monastics. And yet people operating in the West, for example, will point to that sutta as a way of justifying their speciesist violence, right? So all to say is that, yes, the cosmology recognizes these different realms. Animals are below humans, but they are still members of the moral community. So it's not justifiable to exploit them and oppress them.
So if they're seen as less than, can Buddhism and veganism ever be compatible? If veganism is about equality and fairness and justice, are they compatible in that way? And just another part to that question as well, when I understand as part of this lower realm that other animals, the suffering that other animals experience is expected to be greater than what humans experience. So if the rebirth and all of that, if you're born into a human body as opposed to another animal body, the other animal is going to have a greater suffering. So that's why it's considered a more unhappy rebirth, if I'm understanding that correctly. But can this also make or normalize the violence and violations that are perpetrated for other animals as well? Could that be part of it? Because it's expected, and it's like, well, other animals are meant to suffer more here, so it's kind of justified or normalized in that way.
I wouldn't say that the expectation is that animals would suffer more. It's that they don't have the opportunity to practice and achieve enlightenment. So it's not intrinsically, oh, you're going to suffer more. It's more just not having access to being able to practice, which is the path to liberation. And personally, I don't see this cosmology be as incompatible with veganism. I mean, I don't use the framing of a quality. I think it's more about just justice, and maybe that it could appear to be parsing too finely the difference, but there is, I mean, animals are not the same as human beings in many ways, significantly with cognitive capacities and the ability to do what we're doing right now with the technology that humans created, for example. But they are members of the moral community, and the other thing is about they are entitled to be treated. An element of talking about why they're members of the moral community and entitled to respect is the fact that in previous rebirths, all sentient beings were at one point in time our mother, our father, our sons, daughters, so it would be disrespectful to harm them. So that's one lens on it. But more foundationally, it's not about that they're going to suffer more. It's just that they're limited in their capacity to achieve enlightenment and be freed from the cycle of rebirth. So I personally see them. I don't see veganism and Buddhism as being incompatible. And moreover, I'm actively bringing attention to the core teachings that, to my understanding, affirm the fact that they are in fact compatible. I hope that's helpful.
Thanks, Philip.
We've got a question from Deb about other animals having group souls as opposed to individual ones.
I'm not quite sure what group souls means. It's more the concept is there is the unifying consciousness, by whatever name you want to use it, great soul or ultimate reality, the Dharma, because it's essentially an alignment issue. It's coming into alignment with reality. So I don't think there's a differentiation. I think that authentic Buddhist teachings do recognize that all sentient beings are members of the moral community and are part of that unified field of consciousness, I think is a more accurate way to frame it.
Okay. I got a question, although what Nella has said and what Wendy has said and what you said has probably kind of ripped it to pieces already in a way. So I think you can drive a bus through this now, but I'll give it a go anyway. I always like to ask movement questions, as you know, Philip.
Yes.
And in relation to, say, when Francione found out that Jains were resistant to veganism, you're saying this in the Buddhist tradition or parts of it. So I wanted to talk about values, because on the face of it, you would think, well, in terms of being aligned with vegan values, well, the Buddhists must be close to that and the Jains must be close to that. And we've always said the left must be close to that, right? Which is, the reason why the movement was seen as left-leaning, for generations. And yet there's tensions all the time because of, I suppose, when it comes down to it, that word we've been using, cultural speciesism. So does it really mean that Donald Watson is right, which is that veganism stands alone and almost like above other movements? He called other movements lesser movements because they don't cover as much. It's their scope is always limited.
Mm-hmm. So I'm not clear on the question in there, Roger. Like what are you saying? Can you just kind of
I'm just
summarize
saying
your question?
Yeah, in terms of values, we should have a symbiosis with these groups, but we're struggling to kind of reach them. Even though, if you look at the values, it would appear that they're so similar that there must be a kind of fruitful kind of alliance between all of those things. Buddhism, the left, Jainism, veganism.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree. And at the risk of sounding to be, just reiterating what we've been talking about, let me put it in a Buddhist frame. In Buddhism, they talk about the three poisons that are the fundamental hindrances to realizing, to awakening, right? And the translation I prefer, craving, so wanting, aversion, pushing away, and unconsciousness. Greed, hatred, and delusion is a more traditional English translation of those terms, but the craving, aversion, unconsciousness is my teacher's translation, and I prefer it. So essentially, it's what you're describing is the fundamental unconsciousness to the reality of the fact that we are all part of one larger whole, and to harm what appears to be another, in quotes, is to harm oneself. And it's so in my mind, it's a matter of a lack of consciousness, and that informs in the Western frame the cultural speciesism. It's just we are literally as a society unconscious, to the reality that is expressed as cultural speciesism. So I think it's really just removing this, and this kind of framing has always really served me well. It's removing the obstacles, removing the illusions, as opposed to building something that is going to supersede the ignorance and express as cultural speciesism in this context. People just need to be awakened to the actual reality, and the meditative practices. Their sole purpose, or their fundamental purpose, is to achieve that mundane level of consciousness. Because if you don't know what you don't know, if you're just myself, I'm going through life, well, I'm here and you're there, and the dogs are over there, and everything is separate and discrete entities, and I need to make my way through the world by behaving selfishly, in essence, right? Making sure that I get what I need, this illusory, ultimately, and that's an unconscious way of being in the world. So the practices are about becoming able to see through that illusion, as necessary as to a certain degree it is, right? It's really being skillful enough to hold the fact that, yes, I am separate, and I do need to eat and sleep and be in the world in ways that I have the resources to continue to survive as an embodied being. That's true, but it's only part of this story. Ultimately, that's an illusion, and to be able to, through practice and insight, hold both of those things at the same time. That's really the art form, right? And that's the example that we have to be to folks who are still under the thrall of cultural speciesism, and recognize other animals as being separate and not part of the moral community.
Well, I think this has been a really interesting session, because it's taken us to places we don't normally go, I think, which is, well, I suppose we could have foreseen that, but I mean, it's certainly been quite interesting in that sense. Any last words, panel?
I've got more questions now than I had before, but I know we're out of time. So yeah, because obviously as we chat, more things light up in your brain, and you're like, oh, I really want to ask this now. But so yeah, it's been really interesting to go to on the Starship Enterprise to places never visited before. So thank you for that, Philip. I really appreciate that. And there's some really great questions coming up in the chat as well that we don't really have time for now, which is a shame. But yeah.
Well, we can always revisit, and Wendy, privately, happy to have a conversation. Happy to come back another time.
That's great.
It is. I think it is based on that recognition of all sentient beings being members of the moral community. It's an opportunity to bring veganism to a broader audience, and to incorporate these teachings to illuminate for non-Buddhists, or just people in general, the reality that we have come to as vegans. Some of these tools, mindfulness, meditation, could be useful.
Yeah. So kind of blending. Sometimes it's we're going to veganize Buddhism. Are we going to Buddhist vegans? I don't know. What do I be there? Buddhanize.
And just before we close out, I want to just say thank you again for welcoming me. This is a core community for me, and I'm grateful to be able to support the community where I'm able. And I just want to dedicate my work today to my friend Michael O'Malley, who was a guiding light on the path of recovery for me, and who passed away this weekend at age 82. Dear soul.
Yeah, sorry to hear that, Philip.
Thank you.
Condolences.
Thank you.
Right. So just leaves me to say thank you for people who stayed with us. And there's people on Facebook as well as on YouTube. So thanks everyone for tuning in. We shall be back. There's no point in us making a promise because we'll never keep it. We shall be back. I think that's about the best we can do. Philip, thank you very much for your work, and I'm sure we'll see you again in this format and elsewhere. So thanks everyone, and we'll see you again pretty soon.